Fabrice, hopping on the stream today.
Yes.
Welcome. Let me turn down the music real quick, make sure I can hear you, and we're good to go. One, I wanted to say thank you for hopping on with me. Always good to have a new face in the streaming world. But I'm looking forward to our conversation. I know we're talking about divine masculinity. I'll pass you the mic. I know you're representing Feather Scribes over on YouTube. So anyway, I'll pass the mic to you, man, and let you kick us off here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Derek. It's for a long time I've been watching you on Facebook, and I wanted to hop on and just have a great conversation. I think for me recently, and all the other men my age, with everything going on, it's been hard to define masculinity. So I think this is going to be a great topic. I'm excited.
Yeah.
And you always make things fun, so I'm happy to just dive deep and just hear what your experience has been, what I can learn from you, what the audience can learn. It's going to be fun.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it, man. Looking forward to it. All right. Let's dive on in. So you think about this topic, what are questions that come to mind, or what strikes you when we begin talking about that divine masculinity, or masculinity in the Jesus way?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is like the way Jesus did it. It's really hard to kind of glean it from the Bible, because what Jesus was doing, it's like, teaching, preaching, and healing, and it's, I think it's all there, but it's really hard to see. Especially, I think Jesus had an entire life, like 30 years of his life, that we didn't know what he was doing. It's just all obscure. But I think we can learn a lot from his life, and just from what I've seen, I think, a huge part of who Jesus is someone who is, in a sense, someone who provides, someone who leads his people. I remember the scripture where, thousands are following him, and he doesn't send them away. In fact, he chooses to feed them. So I think there's many ways we can see Jesus being, not only God himself, but a man of God. You can see divine masculinity in him.
Sure.
I guess, what's your take? What's your take on Jesus and the way he presents how to be a masculine man?
Yeah. I mean, I think about there are qualities in that I think about when it comes to masculinity. One question I ask is, what are some necessary components? And I think one of those for sure would be courage. It would be somebody who has fear and says or does the difficult thing, and not just is a pushover. And they're not just it's not just about what's convenient. It's not just about what's easy. It's not about what's simple necessarily, but it's standing up to the bully. It's standing up to the people who are abusing their authority. It's standing up for the less than, the marginalized. It's speaking up on behalf of people with less privilege. So when I see him doing that, I think naturally I think about the parable of the sheep and the goats, right? Like when he's talking about this parable, and this is one of those very, very powerful parables when it's two sides of it, and even on this parable from Matthew 25, the contrast is the sheep and the goats, and the fascinating detail about that parable is there's not like a wolf character, there's not a monster, an evil villain character. The goat is simply those who do not live a proactive life, helping the less fortunate and the less privileged. So when he brings up the 6 things in that passage, those who are hungry, did you give them food? Those who are thirsty, did you give them drink? Those who are naked, did you give them clothes? Those who are sick, did you look after them? Those who are in prison, did you go to visit them? Those who didn't have a home, did you bring them into your home? So you have like these six different examples he uses in this passage, and I think when I think about those things in my own life, or even in the men around me, I think they're found with people who will proactively go live out the message. In other words, it's not a passive thing. So if we're talking about being assertive or even aggressive, those would be two of the acceptable realms of this biblical masculinity, or this Christ-like masculinity. But it certainly would not include being passive and waiting around, because if we're just looking at that parable, the man who was waiting around and doing nothing for the less fortunate, they're condemned. They're going into the fire prepared for Satan and his angels. Like that, that's the consequence. So I think about courage, assertiveness, using what you have to serve and help the less fortunate would easily be one piece of the masculinity puzzle if we're looking at Jesus.
Absolutely. And I like that. I like the idea of being assertive and aggressively compassionate, going out there, going out of your way, not staying in your comfort zone, you know. And I like that passage so much because, you know, there are consequences to you to just, not even in your life, not just in the people around you, even in your life, not being proactive, not being compassionate, or not even like putting in the effort. And I think nowadays, many men, especially young men, have lost the idea of like, okay, it's actually manly and it's right to be compassionate and to be generous. And in fact, they fall for a more aggressive and less productive form of masculinity that's presented by the likes of Andrew Tate and all these other guys, and they lose the Jesus side of masculinity. And I think it's very useful that we kind of present that generous and proactive, like you're saying, compassion. I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you think about that? What's your take on
Yeah,
that?
no, 100%, 100%. I think I'm glad you brought up compassion, because some stories of the scriptures will give us not just one single virtue; it's a cluster of virtues. So even like that parable of the sheep and the goats, is it just assertiveness? Is it just courage? No, there's compassion. So we might even put compassion, mercy, courage. We might even have confidence in there, like this the idea of believing you have something to give. And you have these cluster of virtues that are exemplified in this one parable. So it's not just, again, it's not one dimensional; it's multi-dimensional. So when I think about that virtuous person, compassionate, that the compassion, that generosity, the mercy, the kindness, the courage, that I would say those are all, embodied in that text. If we're looking at this, that one story that Jesus told, that he did exemplify as he served people over and over again. I mean, every time you're looking at him, he seems to be teaching, preaching, helping, healing. Like that's it, teaching, preaching. Like I'm looking at another chapter, he's teaching, preaching, or he's helping, healing. But all of that embodies this assertive individual. He's not just waiting around for something to happen. No, like he's assertive, and maybe the one exception would be when he's going to get that alone time to get recharged with his connection with God, to get some
Yeah,
alone time to pray. But other than that, every instance that we see is teaching, preaching, or helping, healing.
absolutely. And in a sense, I guess a question I have for you, which is really hard to delineate, where do you draw the line between, you know, the assertiveness and the confidence, and then like the humility that Jesus shows? Because it's really hard to like know the boundary between, okay, you know, here I should, you know, step back and get some input, but here I should be proactive and go after it and trust myself that I am capable and kind of, in a sense, I am competent in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've done this wrong. I've done this right. I've done this probably both sides of the equation. There was a
Mm,
time when I was really sensing a call by God to do prison ministry stuff here in town. So
yeah.
there was things happening behind the scenes. It's funny. I was actually reading that passage, that Matthew 25 passage, and I was thinking about doing prison ministry stuff. And I was like, so I started doing the paperwork for one of the facilities in town. I met one of the other guys who had done prison ministry in the juvenile sector, and he started. I told him if he wanted to lead the way, I'd gladly learn because I had never done it before. He ended up moving, and while we started off in a juvenile center, realizing that didn't seem to be what I was looking for in an experience, because in the juvenile center there's a bunch of turnover. So then if
Yeah.
you'd go one week, with a group of guys, and then the next week it's a brand new group of guys. What I was thinking as far as the impact I wanted to have, I wanted to be able to see some of the same guys over and over again, which is probably better suited for a prison setting. But the reason I bring it up
Yeah.
is I remember going to get advice about it at the time, and the advice was like, don't go alone. Like, you know what I mean? I think that's good advice, especially in that setting. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's potentially dangerous, and the church probably didn't want any, like, that element of liability of, if Derek goes and something happens to him, what would his family say? You know what I'm saying? His family, what if his family looks at the church the wrong way or whatever? Now, I did go
Yeah.
against that advice ultimately, and I was like, hey, like, I think I'll be able to persuade or motivate more people to come with me if I do go first and if I go alone. I'm not trying to go alone, but sometimes there's that old proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And
Yeah.
and so anyway, I say all that to say is the humility. So if we're talking Jesus, teaching, preaching, helping, healing, the humility is that element of, you could pause and, maybe we'll call it going to the bench of the game to recharge and to get re-equipped to go back in the game. But sometimes, and I've done this as well. I've done this wrong, where you can get a bunch of advice, but never get around to actually doing something. And so
Mm.
early on in my life, I didn't want to be that guy. I'll be the guy that does too much, and people will try to, maybe pull me back to do less. I'm okay being with that guy. As far as if we're talking the end of my life, what are my regrets going to be? My regrets aren't going to be, hey, I tried to do it the safe way, or I wish I would have done more. No, I did it. I learned. I made mistakes, and then I was able to move forward. So, again, advice. It's certainly a space of, is so much value in talking to people who have done what you want to do, and being willing to be humble enough to submit to them, in the sense of going to them as somebody who has more expertise than you, to be able to move forward in a more effective way. So it's certainly an and both. Hey, like, be humble, go get input, yet don't allow the process of input, reading, learning to hold you back from actually going to do, because that's where all the
Yeah.
that's where all the magic happens. That's where all the impact happens, is when you actually go and do. People who are being served, they don't care if you know 10,000 scriptures or if you know one. They're grateful to be served. So that's what I'll say there. There is that and both. Humility for
Absolutely.
sure. Humility is a virtue that's worthwhile, and it will bless you over and over again.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, that prep time, just slowing down can be an excuse and can kill great ideas. Like you said,
Yes, yes, yes.
I know I've had friends who had amazing ideas, um, but when you wait and you wait for people to give input and to give approval, sometimes the idea dies in the process of just being thought of, in a sense. But yeah, I think
Right.
action is really important. Especially for men. You gotta go and try and fail, but
Yes.
then learn from the process.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
so yeah, and,
Huh.
and I know for myself, like my dad shaped the way I view masculinity and stuff. Um, I guess on a more personal note for you, like has how did your relationship with your parents and your dad and all the mentors in your life shape the way you see how to be a man of God? If you can, give a brief history of, just the men in your life who've shaped you.
Yeah, I mean, man, there's so many. There's so many guys that I think God put in my life to understand, like, what this was supposed to look like. I think about that. I had so
Yeah.
many coaches in my life who showed up. I mean, I've literally forgotten names of the number of men who would show up to take me to basketball practice. And, like, it's
Mm.
crazy that I'm sitting here 20, 30 years later, I don't know their names, but their service I still remember. And I think about, like, I want to be like, this is the idea of showing, of 30 years from now, somebody remembering that I served them. They may not remember my name, but they're talking again. If they're talking in an interview setting about the impact I had on them, that I don't even remember if I said thank you back then when I was, 6, 7, 8, and 9. But for sure, coaches made a big impact. The element of providing, I think I saw my grandpa doing that in a big way. Even and there's an element of negative examples I saw as well, as far as like kind of men I didn't want to be. Like I saw examples of again, guys that would just lie, and I just there was a part of me very early on. I saw guys who would lie or who would break their word, and I was like, I never want to be that way. And I
Mm.
think the cautionary tales of men around me have been plentiful, and seeing those examples and going, nah, I don't want to be like that, has been another again. I think a blessing to have cautionary tales around you of people you don't want to be like.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. Even the people who've set a bad example are in a sense teaching you, like, it's instead of you going out there and failing in that way, you see bad examples and you're like, I don't want to model these bad role models. I want to follow these guys that I see are, like you said, men of their word. What does that mean to you, like a man of his word?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's not just. I think the basic thing I could say is right. You say one thing and you do one thing, but I think
Mm.
it's for somebody who's wired like me. It's whatever I want to commit to. Maybe chop that in half, or maybe chop that in threes, and or chop that into a third of it, because I'm somebody. I think the expression when it comes to eating is like your eyes are bigger than your stomach. It's like everything that you see, you want to do, you have just these ambitions. You want to cram so much into your schedule, and you want to be able to do a bunch of things. But so there's part of it is, yeah, let's when you make a commitment, ensure you can do it, but really think through that commitment when if somebody asks you for something where you're able to effectively come through on it. But yeah, it's certainly honesty and integrity, but it's also being slow to make a commitment to ensure you absolutely could come through with it. Which again, I felt so many times early on. I mean, there's so many phone numbers probably along the way that I got, or people I was reaching out to, or people I said, "Hey, I'd call you to set up a time," and this never happened. So like again, I just had to change and repent of using my language so flippantly and not being really specific and going, all right, if I say I'm going to hang out with you or we're going to do something together, like, and you're an example of this, even when it's setting this up, which was pulling that calendar out and offering the days and offering the times and moving that forward. And that's where if I say I want to hang out with you and we don't talk about the calendar, then do I really want to hang out with you? Do I really want to make the time if we don't get the calendar out? So that's something that I just had to change along the way, because I feel like if I'm gonna give an account for every careless word that I've spoken, right, from that Matthew 12 concept, and
Mm.
I feel like God's gonna sit me down, and He's gonna go, hey, like, son, like, do you realize how many commitments you spoke about compared to how little you fulfilled? Like, come on, like,
Wow.
so again, it's just something that I've just had to radically change.
Dang. That's convicted me a little bit. Like I think like most people, we can tend to be people pleasers. So on the other hand, when it comes to make sure you honor your commitments, you also have to make sure you're not just a yes man. Like
Yeah.
people tell you, hey, can you make this? You're like, oh yeah. I think learning to not please people all the time. And then your word will matter more because then they'll know if you say something, then you mean it, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
that's pretty cool. I think you've convicted me. I have to like reorganize the way I even make plans because it's always, I'll see if I can make it, very flimsy and kind of, I guess, unrefined and not defined in a
Right.
sense.
Right.
But yeah,
It's and it's
yeah.
it's made me refine the way I also evaluate, because the way I evaluate opportunities to serve, because by God's grace, He shifted and shaped my heart into a servant's heart, into a giving heart, but then also realizing like my limits as a person in what I can do, and also what's best for me to do and what's best for me not to do. Like there's that tough lesson that I still wrestle with. I don't think I've mastered this one, but like when you look at maybe Acts chapter 6, and you have this
Mm.
problem, the Grecian widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. You have this problem in the scriptures. And then
Yeah.
when Peter and the apostles are getting involved to resolve this problem, like ultimately they say, look, we gotta spend our time in prayer and the ministry of the word. We can't be this like
Mm.
doing, so much ministry of the word and so much prayer and go wait on the tables. Like we got to bring up other men to be able to do that. And when I think about that passage, what I've had to learn over the years is like I can say no to some things to say yes to the things that matter most. Not that serving those Grecian Jews and making sure they were taken care of, those widows were taken care of. It didn't matter. No, it mattered. So put somebody who's reliable and faithful over there to be able to do that. So there's been in the church environment, especially as the church grows, there's so many opportunities to serve. And when I was young, I just wanted to do it all. You just want to show up, yes, 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 yes. But then, like as I'm older, I think about, all right, well, I mean, this season of my
You're
life right
lagging a
now
little bit.
is it lagging right now? Can you?
See if I can get you back.
All right, I'll let me know once you're back with me. Oh, I see you moving a little bit. Can you hear me? Oh, I might have lost him.
All right, I'm
All
back.
right, he's back. He's back in the mix. Appreciate you persevering.
Yeah. Technical demons all the time be getting us.
Yes,
But yeah,
yes.
awesome.
But no, what I was sharing about was
Yeah, you
learning
were talking about how you gotta say no to some stuff to say yes to more important things, but not just that, but be willing to let someone else take over at the other stuff.
exactly,
Just
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, so like in a church that's bigger, the way the church that we are part of is there's so many opportunities all the time to serve. And when I was
absolutely.
younger, it was like, hey, you say yes to everything. But then, as I'm older, I'm like, oh no, like I might even have time. Like, I mean, but it doesn't mean that it's best for me to go. So like even like this season right now, like I volunteer 4 times a week. I mean, if when it comes to T-ball, right? I'm helping in the community and I'm helping with my brother, my niece, you know. So then that's significant. You know what I'm saying? Like that's a significant portion of time every week. So that means I'm saying no to a lot of other opportunities because I'm saying yes to this window of an opportunity. Then again, my niece is only 4 1 time, and she might not ever play t-ball. Like we don't know how long she's gonna play t-ball, but to be able to be involved in her life like that is really special and precious to me. But it means I'm also saying a no to many other opportunities to serve.
Yeah, I have to say, I really commend you for doing that 4 times a week. And I don't know much about Tebow, but you're absolutely a hero. They should probably start paying you for that, man. That's a lot of work. So I commend you for that. And I think I admire that, just being willing to sacrifice, just for the people you love, for the people in your life, and being there for them. And I
that
think they appreciate it. You being there.
that
But
was
yeah, definitely.
that's one of them too. When you asked me the question about that masculinity in Jesus' eyes, and even like what husbands are called into in the role, in the idea of the husband, like if when I'm talking
mm,
to a husband or a wife, or even maybe they're engaged and are thinking about it, and it's like, okay, well, think about what both of you are called into by the scriptures. The man is called to love his wife as Jesus loved the church. Well, Jesus
mm,
gave his last breath. He sacrificed every comfort, he sacrificed every convenience for the church. So the man, the husband, is to be prepared to sacrifice his last breath, his every comfort, his every convenience in the name of loving his bride. So, all of that to say, the piece of sacrifice as a man in the eyes of God, I think there's a piece of that it was the men who would prepare to go to war, to be willing to die.
mm.
And that's something that I think is I think that of the things that Andrew Tate says that he gets wrong, I think that's one of them that he gets right. Is when he talks about a man should be willing to sacrifice his very life, comfort, and well-being in the name of protecting and providing for his loved ones, especially his wife. I think he gets that right, and that's not because he said it, but it's because it's already rooted in the scriptures for thousands of years. So um,
Mm.
that's one of them.
And
I think he does get right.
absolutely. And I guess, talking about marriage in a sense, how long have you been married again?
Yeah,
How long has it been?
this June is going to be 10 years. So we're about to hit double digits.
Wow, congrats, man. 10 whole years. That's awesome. And you already talked about sacrifice, but how else is a man supposed to lead? We know sacrifice, but what are some other key points, for those of us looking at marriage in the future, already married?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting in the Christian realm,
Mm,
because you're aware that you're supposed to sacrifice again, be willing to sacrifice your last breath, your every comfort, your every convenience, to be willing, and to be aware that your wife is called to submit to you in everything,
mm,
which is like, if the man truly grasps that, then the idea of what he's putting forward for the family to do and to live up to and to lean into, examples of, all right, so if we're having a conversation and somebody's asking me to help them as a husband, okay, well, um, your wife, assuming your wife is somebody who wants Jesus as Lord, has the scriptures as her standard, then all right, so
mm,
she's gonna, her disposition, her attitude is to submit to you in everything. So I would ask them, one, yeah, are you sacrificing for her? But two, um, what direction are you providing for her to submit to? Examples of, when are you directing your family, and her into prayer? Sounds really basic, but it's something that so
mm,
easily get neglected. Well, how are you calling her into learning the scriptures? I'm not saying you got to tell her to read a chapter a day. I'm saying my wife and I, this is one area we're growing in, is I proactively pick a verse for us to memorize together. It sounds really basic. I went years with not doing that, but I was just asking myself, am I providing leadership for her to learn God's word better? She reads on her own, but when we're together, like, it's reasonable for us to at least be learning one verse together until we have that memorized, and then we move on to other ones. Um, but I think that's the piece of it, of when it comes to leading your family. Well, where are you leading them to? Are you leading her to know the word better? Are you leading her to serve the community better? Are you leading her to have better relationships with other women? Are you leading her to, to think about how she could serve her coworkers? Like, what are you? If we're saying leading, we're saying they're going from where they are to where they should be or where they could be. Then where's that going? What's that navigation path that they're going down? So it takes, the way I kind of explain it from an analogy perspective is, you have the, if we're talking about like a basketball game,
mm,
both the husband and wife are players, and both are actually referees too, as far as some boundaries. They could blow the whistles and call something that was out of bounds or out of line. They're both referees, they're both players. The husband is head coach, the wife is also assistant coach. So there's multiple roles in the marriage dynamic. The element though of, to be really clear, the head coach is responsible for the overall well-being of the team. So that head coach has to realize, all right, well, how's our team doing right now? And what adjustments do we need to make to be able to be effective and successful moving forward? So all of that involves an awareness, ability to grab, hey, how are we doing as a marriage? How are we doing as a couple? And then what do we need to shift to move it into a better place?
Yeah. And I think all that requires that the husband be definitely trustworthy and dependable, for the wife to be able to submit in that way and trust the leadership in a sense. Um, and I guess like in your relationship with your wife, like how do you build the trust of like, okay, I know Derek is a dependable man. I know if he decides for us to make this move in our relationship, I'm trusting that it's the right one. How do you build that sort of trust?
Well, I think before I answer the question, so two concepts you brought up, which one of them you
Mm,
brought up is, it's in an ideal state, he's trustworthy and dependable, and that's what
mm,
encourages and motivates the submission. But in a obedient state, even if he's not trustworthy and dependable, if I was talking to my sister in Jesus and she was saying, "Hey, like,
mm,
do I have an out if my husband is not trustworthy and not dependable? Do I have an out to not submit to him in everything?" I would tell you,
mm,
what are those scripture? That scripture tells me submit to him in everything. Even if he was an unbeliever, 1 Peter 3 tells us that even your attitude then is, there's a gentleness, a quietness, a submission. Your behavior should be winning him, the unbeliever, over in your marriage. So
mm,
it's so I, whenever I hear somebody bring up, it's almost like you didn't say this, but it's almost
mm,
like they built in a condition to their submission, which is he reliable and trustworthy? But
mm,
if I'm having that conversation with my sister in Christ, I'm going, no, 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 no. Like you're preloading a condition of your submission of reliable and trustworthy. The call of Jesus is, even if they're not, still to win him over with your behavior, with that quietness, with that submission, with that reverence, with that gentleness. That's what that, if you go study Ephesians 5, go study 1 Peter 3, and in what conclusions would you come up with other than that? But just, it's the same way on the husband side. It's not, well, as long as she's submissive, then you sacrifice every last breath, every comfort, every convenience. No, no, no. It's, even if she doesn't, even if she's disobedient to God, then still having that disposition, that attitude to submit every last breath, every convenience, every to sacrifice every comfort.
yeah. And I think it's really hard to kind of align the biblical kind of blueprint for how a relationship should be between husband and wife, and between the modern concept of um, equality, not only in nature but in like responsibilities between men and women. So how do we navigate? It will be, I think, for most women nowadays, it will be really hard to hear the word submit to your husband, even if it's biblical. I think most assume submission is sort of a lower position, as per se, the person submitting is lower than the person they're submitting to. So you know how do we approach, as a church in general, the idea of like, okay, there is gender roles, and also these are the gender roles.
Sure, sure. So
Mm,
I think that it's the root is, are we basing our lives on the scriptures with a divine, a biblical worldview? Because if we're not basing it on that, then the conversation's over. And it's like, okay, so if the conversation is based on a biblical worldview, and if I want to be a disciple of Jesus, then one of the things I'm doing is denying myself. Second thing I'm
mm,
doing is I'm carrying my cross daily. Third thing I'm doing is I'm renewing my mind. I'm not being corrupted by the world, but Romans 12 tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So whatever the world's doing, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Do not conform to what the world's doing. So that means I'm aware of I can be aware of what the world, I don't have to be aware, but I can be aware of what the world's doing. But the believer is meant to not conform to that pattern of what people outside the church are doing, but to be transformed by the renewing of their mind. Then they'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. But even if you read the rest of that verse too, like again, chapter verses 1 and 2 of Romans 12, that gives us that full insight. So before we move to maybe that might be the fifth step or sixth step of teaching submission, it's wait, make sure are we on
Derek,
the
can
same.
you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Did I lose you again?
Think we're lagging again.
I can hear you, but you may not hear me. There we go. I think we're
All
back.
right. Yes. So go over the scripture again. I missed the last part.
So Romans 12 verses 1 and 2. So the idea is to not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So you asked the question, like, hey, how do we kind of contextualize submission in the church? Well, sometimes it's good to revisit the foundation before we talk about contextualizing submission to women in the church with the different gender roles. Do we have a biblical worldview where we still believe God's way is the supreme way, the Isaiah 55 concept? My ways are above your ways. And so do we still believe that? Okay, if we do, let's keep going. If we don't, then we're probably not going to ever get onto the same page. But if we do, and if we both agree it's best for us to deny ourselves, Luke chapter 9, it's best to carry our cross daily. We believe in those things. Okay, so we both believe in that. We believe Romans 12 teaches to not conform to the pattern of this world. So that what the world does doesn't mean we're bringing that into the church or we're bringing that into our lifestyles, but we're being transformed by the renewing of our mind. I mean, we're a person reset on that which we know to put God's ways first. So if that's the case, then all we're doing is looking at if we have agreed about denying ourselves, carrying our cross, not conforming to the pattern of this world, being transformed by the renewing of our mind. That means once we get to the submission passages, it's just all of those decisions we already made to deny self, carry your cross daily, to not conform, to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. All of it then is full. It's easily understood by the time we get to Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3. He's back.
All right.
All right. I know we were getting heated up there.
We are. I'm loving it. I think it's really important to understand the idea of not conforming to the patterns of this world, because it's definitely it's easy to fall into, especially if that's all we're surrounded with. If we're not in our scriptures, we can get engrossed into what the world is doing, and think that is how we should be as well. But yeah, I love the point. Definitely not conforming, but more relying on what God's vision of our lives should be. Absolutely.
That's right.
And like, I think we're at a point where the reason why it's so hard, like the world is diverging so much from what the Bible calls us to do. So it's either, it feels like a choice, like you either live as one of the world or you live as a Christian, and there's no in between. And I think it's good because then like there's a separation, but it's also really hard because it makes, I don't know, to me it feels like the church is becoming more traditional as the whole world is just losing their grip on reality in a sense. It's really hard to,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But I mean,
And I think, go ahead.
You know what's interesting is when I spend time, like when I talk about this expression of being on the front line or at the ground level and talking to people who are in the world, who are
Yeah.
um, it's it's interesting how people with really strong opinions sometimes don't even spend time with people who are actually in the world or at the front lines. So when I say that, I'm talking about sometimes there's this idea of and it's almost this potential idea of a perception of, oh, the world has done that, the world has figured it out, or the world has a happiness that we don't have, or they have a freedom that we don't have, or they have something we don't have. But I'm like, are you
Mm.
actually having conversations with people who are actually in the world, like
Yeah.
people who actually make decisions that are against God's word over and over again, and having conversations with their family members or their friends where their family members are begging you to get involved with their lives because of how destructive their life is right now? Like, it's whenever I hear a criticism of like how criticism of the church or even of doing things God's way, I'm like, do you have real conversations? Or are you basing this on some kind of fairy tale story of what the world has? Because when you're actually in those conversations, it's much more destructive than what's portrayed in sometimes these hypothetical situations. Like in our in that idea, like it's like, well, maybe the world isn't that bad. Maybe there's really fulfilling people. I'd love to find those people. I really would.
Mm.
But there's so much, even people in the world who have things figured out. What I've discovered is most of I mean, all the times that seem that they figure something out is they simply are accidentally obeying scriptures that they don't even know where they're from, where those scriptures are. They don't know the chapters, they don't know the verses, but they found something that works, and the reason it works is because God put it there as a principle for us to use and find
Mm.
and work. So,
Yeah. And I think I have the hope that, I think the world will catch up to the God of the Bible,
yeah.
like people will realize, oh, I think for a long time, people had a hard time understanding, oh, we actually need a community. And the Bible had been talking about, the church for a while, so I think I have a hope that the world is going to catch up at some point. um, I guess a question for you here, um, as we close, and I want to hear your thoughts, in a sense, like, what is one piece of advice when it comes to uh, the way we when it comes to men, what is one piece of advice on how, I guess, on how to not only how to learn from their mistakes, so that it's not, their mistakes don't go to waste.
Yeah. That's good. Did I lose you? Can you hear me now? You might be lagging.
Mistakes, if that makes sense.
Yes. Can you hear me? Are we still? We still. Looks like we have a little bit of a lag.
Oh,
There we go. We're back.
sorry. Which part did you catch? I feel like we should just, we should call those breaks, taking breaks in between. Yeah.
Right. No, I
But
heard your
yeah,
I heard your
which
question. Your
part?
question was about advice to men about helping them to learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
Well, especially if the individual is more action oriented, I think learning from your
Mm.
mistakes is a little bit more reflection oriented. And sometimes these two things are in contrast. So if you're going to learn from your mistakes, you have to be able to reflect on an experience to figure out What happened? Was it a wrong thought, a wrong plan, a wrong word, a wrong deed, a wrong response? Was it the wrong people involved? What happened
Mm.
that that was off? And so if you were to approach something similar, is it, what are you going to change your thoughts about it, your beliefs around it, your words about it, your actions about it? Are you going to change the people that you involved? So it's simply a reflection process, which sometimes when you're action oriented, you could neglect reflection, but it's one of the most helpful tools I think that we can have if you contextualize the lessons from the past for power in the present. Probably the best example of this is David, when he was able to contextualize, and it wasn't necessarily a mistake from the past, but it was an event from the past, and that was the event of what the lion and the bear taught him in the past that equipped and prepared him to face Goliath in the present, which I just think that comes from reflection. It comes from meditation. It comes from pausing long enough to allow the lessons from the past to catch up with you.
Mm. Absolutely. I think, like in a sense, also, if you don't reflect on your actions and you keep doing, you're definitely bound to repeat those mistakes and
That's right.
just fall into the same pattern. Yeah. Also, do you have any advice on how to not fall under the pressure of being a man? I think there's a pressure of like, oh, you have to be successful in your career, you have to be successful um, in your achievement, in your status. How to not only rise to the occasion and actually, be proactive, but to not succumb to like, oh, this is what the world expects from me, but to gain that passion and actually find it on your own terms.
Yeah, I think the element of pressure naturally, part of that is prayer. I think part of that's discipleship for people to be in relationships with other men. There's a component of being with other men who will sharpen you. If you want to develop courage in your life, well, put yourself around people who are courageous. If you want to develop generosity in your life, put yourself around people who are generous. If you want to develop humility in your life, put yourself around people who are humble. And then you have to do is imitate. Imitate the good you see in other people, and then you'll be able to to move up. So when it comes to handling those pressures, if you're able to pray effectively, but then also something that I see so clearly with the biblical version of masculinity is the ability to be real, vulnerable, and I think when I read the Psalms of David, David is one of probably the most masculine dude in the Bible as far as killing off giants and being the king and writing the poetry. I mean, he was a dynamic dude. So when I look at him, and he was able to have moments of doubt, or he was able to cry, he was able to, and the Holy Spirit chose to include those details of his life, like weeping, like the despair, like the
Mm.
doubt that we see in the Psalms and his narrative. So all of that to say is though all those things when it comes to, again, walking with other men, going to God, vulnerable, real, ugly prayer, walking, telling the other guys like Jesus did when it was like, hey, I'm overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Like to have those upfront conversations with your guys. I know I was talking to a friend earlier about this, but the idea is like get 5 great friends around you. That's advice I got early on. One of the guy, one of my mentors, Hervé, he told me he over the years, he said for whatever reason, it's 5. It's not less than that, not more than that. If you have 5 good friends, you're like the likelihood of you being successful spiritually is dramatically increased if you have 5. So 5 spiritual, mature people who want their character to reflect the Holy Spirit and Jesus. I think that's going to set you up for success to navigate when you're feeling the pressure, to even lead you back to God, who's going to be that great alleviator of the pressure.
Absolutely. Build the tribe. I love that.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about, being unified with people who are giants in the faith, people I admire, and just, um, being in that vulnerable friendship. So,
Yes, sir.
absolutely. I feel like the whole time I was interviewing you, like, so you've been such a well of wisdom. I really appreciate you. Um, but I think you've highlighted, I think, the basics of what it means to be, of the basics of what it means to be a man, as Jesus intended. So thank you
Hey.
so much. Awesome.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, thank you for your time. And again, shout out to your channel. I'll bring it up one more time. Feather Scribes on
Yes, sir.
YouTube. So if you're
On
listening
YouTube.
in,
It's about faith. I interview multiple people who are leaders in their faith. I go to other denominations, so I don't just focus on non-denominational. So if people are interested, it's very scholastic. So a lot of very hard scriptural things, but I love it. I enjoy doing it. So hope people check it out.
hey, love it, brother. Well, hey, appreciate the time. We'll and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks
All right,
so much,
everybody.
Derek.
You have a good one.
Bye.
Peace.